Greetings. Welcome to Liberty Living's podcast. In this series, we're going to discuss the psychology behind our relationship patterns and how to discover your relationship archetype.
So let's identify common blind spots and patterns that you might experience in your relationships, whether there are some unhealthy entanglements and conflicts, such as power struggles and control issues, insecurities that are projected onto the relationship, or whether you were blindsided by a separation, a divorce, and trying to save your marriage, or whether you have clients that are experiencing these things.
In this video, we'll share helpful tips and in-depth methods that will offer hope and solutions. So we're going to cover how to overcome codependency patterns, making micro changes in your relationships that will produce macro level results, how patterns are formed in our relationships that lead to our greatest saboteurs, and how to remove patterns with powerful recoding steps. So let's begin with blind spots. How are they initially formed? Most commonly, our unfulfilled needs or perceived voids are carried forward from our youth and unwittingly transferred to our primary partners or spouse because it's a familiar pattern formed in our programming. We tend to have a preference for things merely because we are familiar with them. This psychological phenomenon is also known as the mere exposure effect or the familiarity principle. We may feel more comfortable with familiarity because it appears to reduce the uncertainty of anything that might pose a threat. Generally speaking, things that are familiar are likely to appear to be safer than things that are not. If something is familiar, we have clearly survived exposure to it, and our brain recognizes this as safety and steers us toward it. The brain resists uncertainty as its greatest threat for survival purposes, although it's not necessarily safer. Therefore, our initial parent-child interaction pattern continues to project into our environment and within our primary relationships, which places the expectation on our partner or spouse to meet our needs or fill the void in an attempt to deepen our feelings of self-worth and validation that we didn't receive in our youth. And this often translates to our primary love language of how one either felt loved or possibly ways they didn't feel loved as a result of these unmet needs, or otherwise known as perceived voids, and then therefore seeking it from the partner, which becomes an evident pattern in our relationships because of this familiarity principle. So we can actually receive love in all forms once we address the perceived void. So can you identify any unmet needs or perceived voids from your youth? For example, lacking support during a particular time in your life the way that it was desired, whether it was lacking the quality time, service, material needs, words of affirmation. Do you recognize any of those love languages?
So, in other words, to reiterate, we generally choose partners unconsciously based on a particular way that we either felt loved or did not feel adequately loved by our parents, such as lacking emotional support, therefore creating our love languages from these patterns. So, subconsciously believing that we are undeserving of love will often lead to this perception of feeling rejected. Therefore, these expectations are then placed onto our partner or our primary relationships to meet these needs, although this is not necessarily the fault of the parent. However, this perceived void often leads to common sabotage patterns and behaviors such as attracting physically or emotionally unavailable romantic partners or acquaintances. And for instance, a person may have developed a fear of abandonment or neglect from this programming and may operate in the relationships with attachment or avoidant type of behaviors. So it could be self-sabotage from past conditioning, which can be reprogrammed once awareness is gained to course correct. Perceived voids lead to patterns of self-defeat, but eventually these patterns can be recoded.
Yeah, and consequently, the programming leaves us to believe, unfortunately, that the power is outside of our control and in the hands of another, and that the significant other must come equipped with the innate quality of meeting our needs instead of addressing our past traumas or void. So here's how we can address a trauma or perceived void. Look for any emotional or behavioral patterns you might have. Do you have any patterns of abandonment in your own relationships, such as past experiences of neglect, separation, or loss that left you feeling alone or causing you to abandon or withdraw from others? And do you also have a tendency to seek love or companionship where it is unavailable?
This method causes us to operate from fear within relationships, which works to our disadvantage because it subjects us to depend on others and allows fear instead of love to win every time. These perceived voids persist throughout our life, seeking to compensate for the feeling of lack from the perception of receiving inadequate love, validation, and attention, and inadvertently finding ways to fill the void, sometimes indefinitely. So we often feel deprived, sometimes chronically, and seek to compensate for this lack, leading to poor coping mechanisms that will perpetuate until it's repatterned.
Right. And this also causes unhealthy coping and escaping behaviors through codependency cycles or other addictions by trying to unfortunately anesthetize the pain. The void often escalates as an imbalance, particularly within a relationship dynamics, and will create cycles of power struggles and unhealthy entanglements until we can break the pattern, no longer resisting the lack or need. And it's a survival mechanism that we form these coping identities and escaping behaviors or facades, such as people pleasing, bullying, or multiple personalities, whatever may be deemed safer than the original behavior that evoked an unloving response, particularly if trauma was involved.
So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to the drama triangle. Whether some of you are or are not already familiar with it, it can also serve as a brief refresher. So the drama triangle is a social model that was developed by psychotherapist Stephen Cartman and describes the codependent cycles and power struggles that exist within primary relationships and intimate relationships and produce other power dynamics, reducing our level of love and respect instead of appreciation, and can cause resentment in these types of relationships, particularly within family branches that are passed on to its members until it's healed. So these three archetypes are: one, the domineering persecutor; two, the enabling rescuer; and three, the fearful victim. So just as a hint, feeling powerless is at the core of each of these relationship archetypes.
And in general, we all have a primary habitual role, whether it's the victim, rescuer, persecutor, when entering into drama triangles. And although the roles are interchangeable, we might oscillate between each of them. And we first learn our habitual role often from our family of origin. And this is also true for our clients. Even though they each have a role they most identify with, once on the triangle, players in the triangle will rotate through all of the archetypal positions, going completely around the triangle. And each triangle archetype has a payoff for those playing it. The antithesis of the drama triangle lies in discovering how to deprive the players of their payoff or eliminate the dependence on the emotional reward. So can you see how deep the ramifications of unmet needs or perceived voids can become, and perhaps even monopolize our lives until we choose to address and adequately resolve them?
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and ask some self-reflection questions so that we can better understand the psychology behind our relationship patterns. So first of all, ask yourself, which archetypal role do you primarily find yourself defaulting to with certain individuals? Is it the victim, the rescuer, the perpetrator, or is it all of the above? Do you tend to oscillate between different archetypes? Next, what have been the most significant lessons in your intimate and primary relationships? And ask yourself, what emotion or emotions do you experience when entering into this drama triangle? What is the emotion these individuals or events trigger or provoke in you that lead you to play this role? And in what way have you expanded or transformed your perspective for the better?
We hope you gained some value from today's podcast. And if you want more support information, you can find more in-depth solutions available in two of our books: one, Genetically Recoded Subconscious Beliefs, and two, Break Codependency Patterns ebook. One of the books will be released in audio version on Amazon, Genetically Recoded Subconscious Beliefs. You can either order one of these copies now on our website or wait for our Black Friday promotion. This makes it available as 2 books for $2 only during the Black Friday special. So be sure to catch next week's podcast on the empowerment model for that. Both of these books do qualify as our prerequisite course to our practitioner diploma programs and our participant healing programs. So you can literally get started for only $1.
Yes, and these books are also available on Amazon, so that's where you will find the promotional, even though they are also available on our website now. So we do look forward to connecting with you next time, and thank you so much for joining us.